Hey there, I'm so pumped to tell you about an amazing new community I've launched called Grief to Growth Circle Community. It's a space for people who are grieving to come together to support each other, and for people who want to know who we are, why we're here, and where we're going to have those conversations, all the things we talk about on the podcast. So I invite you to join me at grieftogrowth.com/community to become part of this compassionate crew. The best part, it's 100% free. And you have access to me in addition to everybody else in the community. In fact, the podcast will be there so you can talk about the things we talk about in the podcast right there in the community. There's also some premium content if you want to go deeper in the work I'm doing, but mostly it's about building relationships in community and about sharing resources and supporting each other. So come on over and check it out. It's grieftogrowth.com/community. I'll see you inside. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Welcome back to another episode of Grief to Growth. If you're coming back, if this is a first-time listener, welcome to Grief to Growth. I'm your host, Brian Smith, and I'm here to guide you through the complexities of life, helping you to understand who we are, where we came from, and why we're here and where we're going. Today, we're going to go into the realms of spirituality and personal growth with our guest, Rob Wykes. Rob is a man whose life journey took him from the physical structures of buildings to the spiritual structures within our hearts. From his early days traversing the landscapes of Europe, Iran, Pakistan, and India, to his profound work as a chaplain and a charity chief executive, Rob's experiences have been nothing short of transformative. His latest work is the book Pause, A Spiritual Power, and it offers a gateway into understanding the separate existence of our spiritual life beyond our rational and emotional selves. In a world that seldom stops to breathe, Rob invites us to discover the spiritual pause, which is a powerful tool for transformation and clarity. But what does it mean to truly pause? We're going to talk to Rob about that. And how can this pause lead us not just to spirituality, but to a deeper understanding of our very existence? His insights challenge conventional beliefs and invite us to explore a spirituality that's not confined by religious boundaries, but instead is a universal human experience. So join us today for the podcast, and make sure afterwards to stop by grieftogrowth.com/community to continue the conversation there. With that, I want to welcome Rob Wykes.
It's great to be with you, Brian. Really looking forward to spending some time with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being with you too. I saw in your bio you're a world traveler. Just to let everybody know you're in Abu Dhabi today. So but you live in the UK. So it sounds like you've had quite an adventurous life.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself incredibly fortunate, really. You know, we kind of travel through life, experiencing whatever the world throws at us, and sometimes it's positive, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And usually it's in the moment that we're in whether we determine whether this is a good or a bad experience. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm very blessed that I'm able to stop and look back a little bit. I'm 61 years old, so I've got a few years under my belt, and it's just nice to be able to say, actually, life is often about a journey more than an immediate experience that we're in, which I think is what stalls a lot of people in life. We all can do it. We focus on our feet, don't we, rather than what's up ahead of us. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it'll help you, but I just share a little bit of my own background. Really, as you said, I come from I actually come from a place called Coventry in the Midlands, in the middle of the UK. And when I went to school, it was very interesting. I went to what was called a grammar school, but I went the year after they changed it from a grammar school. It may mean nothing to many of your listeners, other than to get into a grammar school, you had to pass an exam. It was really a way of selecting off the brightest and the best.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for me, that system ended just before I was going there, and I got in because I could never have passed any test that they would have set me. And it was a very interesting experience. So I did sort of 5 years at senior school, and I left illiterate, which was just shocking. Absolutely shocking. Both my parents, my mother and father, were semi-literate, very difficult. They found it very difficult to read. Never saw a book in the house. So that's the kind of environment. In fact, my parents' motto was, as long as I didn't bring the police home and I was attending somewhere, they were happy. Unfortunately, I failed on both of those those expectations on a few occasions. But yeah, so I went through school, and when I left school, I always remember. It's ironic that I'm here talking to you about a book that I've just published, because when I left school, my housemaster, we called them, sat me down and he wrote the final statement on my report, and he wrote Wykes, that's my name, Rob Wykes. Wykes is an amiable lad but functionally illiterate. And he read it out to me, and I said, "What does it mean, sir?" And he said, "Exactly."
Wow.
He didn't need to say any more, you know. So and also in terms of faith, I would say I grew up in a home with no real faith. My mum was a lapsed Catholic, and she was made to go to the Catholic Church when she was a child. She didn't attend as an adult. And no slight on the Catholic Church, but my only experience of faith or otherworldliness was that Mary would solve every problem we ever encountered. If you cut your knee, I think Mum would invoke Mary on it. So that was the closest. I think the closest I got to faith, really. And then I had a very brief dalliance, I would say, for 2 or 3 years, where I got involved with some mates who smoked a bit of dope, and I got myself into a right knot, got in trouble with the police a little bit. And fortunately for me, probably at the height of that process of slipping down the slope, I was invited along to a church service, and something that was really odd to me and strange. And it was as a result of my eldest sister that I was invited. And all I can say is I had what's often called a Damascus Road conversion, when you literally are going in one direction and your whole life turns around and you start heading in a new direction. Took me many, many years to understand what really happened. But I would say this, that was the first time or authentic moment in my life when I came to recognize there was something beyond me, or something outside of me, that was neither physical or emotional or mental. It wasn't an intellectual understanding. And I think that started me on quite an interesting path. And interestingly, coming on to spend some time with you, Brian, I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and as you have to research, don't you? You never know who you're following, But I've given a lot of thought about this, because one of the elements in my life that's brought me to this space of spirituality was, if you like, a number of deaths, and they're quite poignant in life. One of them, my first ever experience of losing someone was my nan, my mum's mum, and I remember on the day of the funeral, absolutely incapable of going along, and my mum was very upset, and I was 12 years old. But I remember knowing Nan wasn't going to be there. There was something about me that said, you know what, Nan's not there. Whatever is going on, Nan's somewhere else. So I had this sense of that. And actually throughout my life, I've been very involved in funerals as part of my job, really, and my life, my calling, my ministry, whichever way you want to put it. So, but yeah, I had that experience very early on, which I always link really to this sense when I was in that church, becoming a Christian, being experiencing this spiritual experience. In that, again, that was something that said there's something to us that's a bit more than what we can quite work out or add up or articulate. And it was when I had this great experience of faith that I did another crazy thing. One of the things that's true about me is I do lots of crazy things. My wife, if she came in this room, would tell you that it's quite true. And I thought, okay, I've become a Christian. I'm a different person, and I need to do something. So I went and bought a Bible. And on the way back from buying this Bible in what we called our town centre, I bought a ticket. This is completely random, to Athens. So I'm living in England, in the middle of England. I've been to France twice as a school trip, and now I decide I'm going to go to Athens. So I bought this ticket. It was a one-way ticket, and I won't bore you because I would have you here all day. But I got to Athens and ended up in India. So work that one out.
Wow.
And the best way to express it is I found myself drawn towards the East. Again, no real experience of the East. But I went into Turkey, and then when I went from Turkey into Iran, I began to encounter people of faith whose faith I didn't understand, whose language I couldn't speak, and yet there was a connection between us. I then went on into Pakistan, and I met some beautiful people, spent some time with them, and I ended up living in India for a while. And all of this for me was an introduction to a spirituality that wasn't bound by a specific religion or a specific worldview, but that these were human beings, people like you and me, Brian, who are just in a way normal, average people who recognize there's something extraordinary and not average about us. So yeah, that was. And then I was 12. No, I'm only joking. I was a bit older. I got to my 20s by then. Yeah, that was really my introduction to what it must mean to be spiritual. And I'm very blessed because I think I learned quite quickly that to be spiritual is not the same as to be religious. And that's quite important. So it's okay to be religious. Many of us are religious people. But that isn't spirituality. That is a route, or that is a rung on the ladder towards spirituality. So that's really where I began my journey of that I could articulate, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I returned to England. By the way, stop me if you want to stop me anywhere along the line here. But I then returned to England and met a beautiful woman called Cheryl and fell in love and got married. And we got two beautiful daughters. I was in the building trade quite quickly. My whole family were in the building trade, bricklayers and carpenters. But quickly, my wife and I actually felt that we wanted to do something with our lives that wasn't about generating money or being involved in commerce or business. So the only option we thought we had was we went to Bible college, and we went to a small college, like a theological college, spent 3 years there, got to know a little bit of knowledge, in some interesting people. And that's when I got offered the role and took it as the railway chaplain for the northwest of England. So I don't know if in the States you have chaplains. I think you must have.
We do.
You definitely will have prison chaplains and hospital chaplains. Well, we had an organisation, still do have an organisation, which is primarily facing towards the staff on the railway. And I became the railway chaplain for a huge chunk of England. It was the northwest of England. I couldn't possibly get around it all. And that's where I began to understand that people are spiritual and deep and longing. And, in your introduction, you used a couple of phrases, just classic reminders. Where are we from? Where are we going? What's it about? And part of my job was to listen to broken people. I remember, for instance, encountering a driver who had a suicide. So, some poor person had gotten to the end of their ability to cope with life and thrown themselves in front of a train. And of course, he was the one driving it. And probably until his last breath, he felt guilty. But you can't stop hundreds of tons of metal
Right.
at 150 miles an hour. But that frailty within humanity, that some people would say could never be fixed, and yet I discovered in time and with patience, and sometimes I remember that particular man. I would visit his house, and we'd get a cup of tea in his kitchen. He'd make a cup of teas, and we'd go and sit in his garden. And sometimes we'd sit for 30 minutes and never say a word to each other. And when I come to leave, he would thank me for all that I'd said and done. I think I haven't said anything,
Yeah.
Because there's a connection, you see, there's a connection between us that we can't really grasp. And so, I also did a lot of funerals when I was the railway chaplain. I've taken funerals for 30 years as, again, part of what I do. And, I sat with some interesting people. I remember one train driver said to me, I met him in a hospice. I know in the States you have hospice care come into the home, but he was in a place like a hospital, really, called a hospice. And he was, moving towards the end of life. He was in end of life care. And his name was Trevor. I'll never forget him, because I sat and he said his life was a waste. He'd done nothing with it, achieved nothing, and he was leaving nothing behind. He was very depressed. And after about 10 minutes or so, I said to him, "So will it just be me and you at the funeral?" And he said, "Oh no," he said, "I've got a family." I said, "Oh, right." So, and then I discovered he had 6 children. And, if I tell you, Brian, one of them was the captain of a nuclear submarine. 2 of them were head teachers in schools. All of them were really captains of industry. They'd really done well for themselves. And here's this poor man couldn't see that was his achievement. And again, it's just a reminder to us sometimes that, do we have to be the ones that do it? Can we not be the ones that encourage something to happen? And that's another great fulfillment in life. In the charity that I ran, we had a food bank. And I remember, knowing and having to discuss with people that you don't have to hand the food to a hungry person to be part of the journey. You could just buy some and put it in the basket. Right. You could donate some money. You could be part of somebody else's journey. Trevor was a very interesting. And then one other chap that I think has been formative in my thinking, his name was Lee. Lee was, I met Lee. He was a homeless guy and had mental health problems, terrible drug addiction. His drug addiction was ultimately self-medication. He often, because he was homeless, couldn't get his prescription for his mental health problems. And as a result, he would get something from the street, which would help him in a way, but obviously harm him too. And I spent a lot of time with Lee. He used to come to my office, and actually, I'll tell you some interesting stories about Lee. He used to come to my office and have a shower. I had a shower fitted in my office so that anybody that came that wanted a shower could have one, And so he used to come and shower. I remember once he came out of the shower room, which was combined with the toilet, and I'd heard some spraying sound, and he came out and he said, "I don't like your deodorant." And actually it was air freshener for the toilet. He was a great character. But, I always remember that one night he was in a hostel and he had to be thrown out. I happened to be there at the time. And I was so gutted, to see this man. It was a very cold night. He got into trouble, and then people running the hostel had asked him to leave, and he was going to have to sleep on the street that night. And I said to him, "I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry for you, Lee." And he just put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "You wouldn't last 5 minutes in this world." He said, "I'll be fine. I'll be here in the morning." And there he was in the morning, happy and smiling. He knew how to cope. And
Mm.
again, that again was a reminder to me. Before I wrote Pause, I'd written another book called It's Not About the Furniture, which was about these people. And it just, again, was a reminder that we all kind of fit in somewhere. And, some of us cope with certain parts of life and some don't. And so whenever I speak about spirituality, I always want us to be sensitive and conscious that if I say spirituality to some people, they immediately think of religion, church, the mosque, the synagogue, the guru. They think of something like that. Whereas other people, if I say spirituality, they might think of planets and reading the stars, or something new age. When I speak of spirituality and when I speak of pause, and this is what I'm really talking about, and this is the point of my book, that I believe that we are body, soul, and spirit, or body, mind, and spirit. That there are, I would say, I think we're pretty close when we think of ourselves as having three elements to our existence. Now, there may be 10, I don't know. I'm not, I don't know everything. But I think it's been useful for us in history, and it's been recognized that we often think of ourselves in that way of having an intellect that's capable of working things out, an emotional side that's able to feel, and then this bit that we don't know what to do with. And that's what my book is about. We just, mysticism, the word mysticism and mystics, they're called that for a reason. It's because we just don't know where to put them. And we find it hard to categorize spirituality, because even now, I'm rattling away here talking about spirituality, and I'm trying to use words to explain something that doesn't operate in that field. It doesn't use our intellect. And that's why when I say pause, when I describe pause, there are moments in our lives when we allow our consciousness to take a moment, to take a break. And also we allow our feelings, our emotions to take a break. And often when we use the word pause, and I do understand why I selected this word, we probably think we mean stopping something, because that's what that word is most used for. And I don't mean that. I think when I use the word pause, it's not what I've stopped doing, it's what I've then entered into during that stop. So, and that's the mystery bit, because that's the spiritual realm. And I often say to people, if you have a moment of pause, some people access it by meditation, by quietness. Some people will maybe use the phrase mindfulness, but the trouble with mindfulness is just in the word. It's about your mind being active, and pausing is about stopping your mind being active. But in that space is where we experience the essence of our being, that I believe, in a way, I believe will never die, because it was never born, because it's eternal. And that's where I think back to when I was a 12-year-old boy thinking about my nan, and I knew that body in that box was not my nan.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm testing out a new feature. I'd love to get your feedback on it. It's called Fan Mail, and you can send me a message right from the show notes of the podcast. So look for the link that says send me a text. You can ask a question for a future podcast. You can suggest a guest, or just give me any feedback you want. Just remember, it is one way. I can't text you back, and I will not have your name, your email address, or your phone number unless you include it in the message. Let me know what you think.
And I could never explain where she was, but she still was. And that's what I mean by pause. Where does that soul exist, that spirit, exist in the universe? And that's really helpful to me, because it helps me to know that I will live forever in that sense. I'm, never going to cease to exist. The fact that you won't be able to see me or hear me, the fact that there are people in my life that can't touch me, their emotions want me close, and their mind wants the security of knowing I'm around. actually in their spirit, they'll be fine with the fact that I still go on. And that to me is what pause is about. It's not actually about death and life and heaven and hell or all those things. It's about knowing that as a human being, we are so much more than our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. One of the first verses in the Bible that came to me as that's probably the verse that I most adore, and have held it very deep in my heart. And I didn't know why at first. There's a book called Hebrews in the Bible, in the Christian Bible. There's a book called Hebrews, and there's a very famous verse in it in chapter 11. And it's faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the certainty of things yet unseen or not seen. And some translations take that word or the phrase "not seen" and they rephrase it as if I can remember the actual words, I think they rephrase it as not revealed to the senses. And so, and I know that because I read that in many different versions, and that to me again is a reminder that actually I don't have to feel it for it to be true. I don't have to understand it for it to be true. And therefore, if my spirit operates outside of my intellect and outside of my feelings, or without the need for them, then my spirit continues to exist whether I feel it or not. And that's really important for us, I think, as human beings, to know that there's this part of us which we find so difficult to explain. If you don't mind, I'll read it. I just read. There was a guy called Haphold who wrote on spirituality in the late 1800s, really, early 1900s. And he talked about mystics, and he said that the mystic experiences a world that's beyond, which is of something which through it, although it, let me rephrase it. What he actually said was, the mystic experiences a world beyond. It's of something which, though it is interwoven with the world around us, it's not of that world. It's of the eternal world. It's not the material phenomena. And I remember reading him and recognizing again, it's something outside of me. It's something beyond me. And at the same time, it's something within me, because it's my spirit that interacts.
Right.
It's my spirit. So yeah, I mean, I could give quotes all over the place. We all could do that, couldn't we? Quote from everybody else's book and everybody else's thoughts, which is very useful. I'm really kind of excited that I'd like your listeners, I'd like the listeners to acknowledge this. Sometimes we come to a revelation ourselves. This is not a cultish idea. This is that in living out our lives, maybe listening to people like yourself, Brian, and others, and reading and thinking things through, we do come to a place sometimes where we recognize there's an element of truth in that. And it's great when you recap. Remember at the beginning of me speaking, when I left school, I couldn't literally string a sentence together out of a book.
Right.
My comprehension was pathetic. My comprehension was terrible. I could try and read a paragraph. I wouldn't understand what I just read, because there were words I couldn't quite work out. And being able to read, I learned to read very quickly when I got into this spirituality and read of some of the great writers, Gandhi, great people, stuff about Jesus, great stuff. All these great writers that I came across, and the mystics, what you start to see is there's a grain of something that's in you that's in them. And you get on a kind of tide of truth, a wind of something which the scientists might tell us it's rubbish. The psychologists might tell us it's all in your head, Rob. Or somebody else, a counsellor, might say, I think it's just your emotional needs, trying to convince yourself of this.
Right.
Actually, I don't think that's true. I think there's enough weight of people throughout history. Henry Nouwen talked, a guy called Henry Nouwen, who's a Catholic priest, who I love dearly. He's no longer with us, but he broke the mold. He practically got thrown out of the Vatican, which is always a good sign, isn't it? But Henry Nouwen prolifically wrote, and in one of his books, he talks about the desert mothers and fathers. And so, back in the 3rd and 4th century, these are men and women who realized that there was something profound spiritually that you could tap into, but they just couldn't do it in their communities. And so for them, they thought the answer was to go into the desert. That's why they were called the desert mothers and fathers. They would find a cave and they'd sit cross-legged, and listen in silence. The silence is the place. And I remember reading, he talks a lot about how the desert father, St. Anthony, was one of the most famous ones. They would go out to get away from all the noise, only to discover that the noise came with them because it was in their own head. Mm. And they had to learn to pause, to stop that conscious racket in order to enter the silence where they discovered their own spirituality. And what Henry Nouwen suggests in his book, and my book, Pause, Spiritual Power, is full of these ideas. How do I carry on living in a busy city? How do I hold down a job with a wife and 9 kids or whatever you've got? How do I live out my life and access this spirituality? Is it just for people that run off to the desert and join monasteries or whatever? And the answer is no. All of us can do it. I discover not far from my house, within 10 minutes walk, I found a little river where it seems nobody else wants to sit on the bank, which is really helpful. And I just sit and I listen to the water go past. Sometimes a bird will come and talk to me. And that's a whole other subject. Is the bird really speaking to me? Sometimes I lean on a tree and I sense there's something ancient and, again, deep and spiritual even about a tree. And in that place, I found my own desert. And that's where I enter my pause. There are famous people throughout history who have found these. And we don't have to go and sit under a tree like Buddha for however many weeks it is. Right. You don't have to go like Jesus did into the desert and starve yourself however many times. There are ways that we can discover moments in our lives when we become acquainted with the spirit within us. And it's really important because it's the acquaintance with the spirit within me that has allowed me to acknowledge that others have a spirit within them too. Mm-hmm. And, when I think of Lee, that homeless man, I don't know if I'll ever meet him again. That's one of the great hopes of many religious people, is that they'll meet somebody again. I don't know if I will know I've met him again, but I have no doubt he continues to exist. I just can't see him. And that's really important. And again, as a Christian, I'm a Christian. I don't hide that at all. For me, Christianity is a context and a vehicle through which I have discovered my spirituality. And that's not true for everybody. I've got friends that have got faith and no faith. But the most important thing is that discovering the spirit in me has helped me discover what I would describe as God, as some people would say the great spirit, some people say the one, the universe. The more you read, the more you discover we're all kind of chipping away at the same rock. But we often, as human beings, insist on calling it by the name we want to give it. Yeah. That's the sort of. I took a funeral last year. As I said, I take many funerals, and I consider it one of the privileges of my life, actually, to be invited to spend that moment in the family's history when they've lost somebody. And but there was one in particular last year that I took, and I sat with the family, and they were absolutely adamant. There's no such thing as an afterlife. When you're dead, you're dead. It's over. It's just flesh and bones. You rot away. That's it. It's all over. And they didn't want any religious words. They didn't want any suggestion there was a God or a heaven or an eternity. All this, and I let them say all these things, and I tried to respect it. But I said, so when at the end, it's quite traditional. Many people have the curtains closed. If you're at a cemetery or a cremation, they have the curtains closed. And I said, do you want the curtains closed or open? And they said, oh no, we want them closed. We don't want to see the coffin afterwards. I said, and what do you want me to say when I hit the button to close the curtains? Oh, can you say he's at peace now? I said, no, I can't. I said, you've just told me he doesn't exist. How can he be at peace?
Right.
Please help me out. So we had a great conversation, and that's where I started using a phrase. I said, can I just say, call him John for argument's sake, that we're now going to let John go into the mystery beyond our sight, where we may also one day follow. And so I now try and encourage people to think, because you don't have a faith doesn't mean to say there isn't something there.
Yeah.
I read last week, a quote about a scientist who came to the conclusion that all science is. I've got no problem with science because we're stuffed without it, but that all science is untrue, because whatever you prove, somebody else disproves it within the next 12 months. You find an atom is this big, and you discover it's that big, and so on and so forth. Right. So the thing we can depend on most is do you know that there is something about you that is more than your thoughts and more than your body?
Mm-hmm. And
most people sitting quietly would accept that. And my encouragement is then let's pause. Let's give. I remember walking to the top of a fairly reasonable size hill, wasn't a mountain, with my wife, and we stopped at the top and we looked out over a beautiful vista. We lived in a place called Yorkshire. If you ever visit the UK, Yorkshire is a great place to go. And she stopped and took a breath, and I'll never forget it, because she says, this does for my soul what a good meal does for my belly. And I thought, yes. How do we feed our spirit?
Yeah, I like that.
We're very apt at feeding our mind and feeding our body, but how do we feed our spirit? Yeah.
Rob, I do have a few questions for you.
Yes, please do.
You mentioned your let's call it a conversion experience, that experience you had in the church with your sister. You called it a road to Damascus type of experience. What happened there?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar. It's very religious language, but it's so in the Bible.
Oh, I know the road to Damascus. I mean, what happened with you?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wasn't sure if you knew the context. So yeah, what happened was, you've got to remember, I'm a 20-year-old guy. I've got an offence for the illegal possession of a controlled substance, so drugs. I've been hanging out with crooks for the best part of 3 years, and I've never darkened the door of a church. I never went to Sunday school. I wouldn't even know. if I was to go in a church, it would be to pinch the collection plate probably, or get the lead off the roof, which we commonly do over here. And so anyway, she invited me to this service, and I went along because I'd been feeling, leading up to that, I'd been feeling rotten. So in the church, we might use the phrase convicted. I'd started to feel rotten about what I was doing, and I wasn't doing good things. I admit that I was doing bad things. And I sat in this church. They were nuts. It was a Pentecostal, charismatic type church.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there was lots of very, very lively singing and all
I grew up
sorts going on.
Pentecostal, so I understand.
There you go. So they were speaking in tongues. So I was convinced they were on acid. So they'd gone for it. It was great. Well, I'm saying it's great now, but at the time I was thinking this is the weirdest people I've ever met. And there was a baptism. It was a full immersion baptism. So there was a tank, and there was a young man, probably similar age, I think, if I recall, to me, being baptized. And I sat kind of back. I made myself. I had a wall behind me. I didn't really want to get too involved. And they got this guy into the water, and I vaguely recall. I mean, you look back. It's been 30 years. I remember that they were asking him questions about, did he turn from his old life? Did he repent? The usual language. And it was very interesting because I suddenly felt that I wasn't in the room. It was the most amazing experience, to be fair. I know I was sat on a chair. I know I could see the tank, and I know that I could see people around. I remember there was someone with a towel and all this stuff. And I just went. I was not in the room. I felt almost physically like I'd lifted in the air, and I was looking down or at what was going on. I wasn't part of it. And I heard, so I had a voice, but it wasn't an audible voice, something that spoke, which I believe it was God speaking to my spirit. So it wasn't the language that you type on a typewriter, but effectively what I heard was, you will never be clean or right until you go into the water. Now, I didn't get baptized, but I had a burst of energy and an overwhelming sense of joy. Maybe, some people would say I was having a breakdown. I don't think I was. I was nowhere near was I emotionally fraught. And I just had this absolute certainty. In fact, a certainty that I still say to this day, it's one of the most profound, authentic, real experiences I've ever had. That God existed, that I had a spirit, and something inside me had connected with whatever that was. I will use the phrase God. But I didn't get into the water. I just remember they splashed him under and they lifted him back up, and they started singing a song called "I'm Forgiven, I'm Forgiven," and it was good. And I went away. And then actually spoke the next day to my sister, and she said to me, I think what's happened to you, and it all kind of knitted completely. I have to say something here that lots of people will find, I know they find difficult, is that that was 30 odd years ago. I've had doubts, questioned my religious belief structures. I've questioned the church and which denomination, all this stuff, but I have never had a single moment of doubt that day I encountered my own spirit, and my own spirit connected with what I would describe as God. I can't use any other phrase, really.
Yeah. So did you ever get baptized?
Oh, I did. Yes. Yeah. I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I got baptized in India.
And into Christianity?
Yeah. So,
okay.
so I mean, again, that could be a whole new show. But so I went on my journey across the
Right.
world.
Right.
And when I got to India, I went to a place. Well, I went to a group called YWAM, Youth with a Mission, actually founded by a group of Americans. So they were an evangelical Christian outreach,
Okay.
and they had a house in Dilaram House, it was called, in New Delhi. And I lived with them and I did a bit of training with them, actually. I was very fortunate. Got to know some great Christian people. I got baptized in a swimming pool in New Delhi with a load of other people, That was special. It was very special to get baptized in a country, really in a country that wasn't a Christian country,
Yeah, that's why I was a little
Fascinating.
confused when you said in India.
Yes. Yeah. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So you were raised, we'll say nominally Catholic. Your mother has some Catholicism in her background, but you said you hadn't gone to a church, and you go, for people that don't know Pentecostal or apostolic, those, if you're going to go into a church service that's going to like blow your mind, that's where you go. You said people speaking in tongues, full immersion baptism. I grew up in all that. But you also were going these other places and seeing other religions. What is it about Christianity in particular that draws you?
It's the faith of my birth, really. I guess.
Oh, okay.
In terms of spirituality, it's actually a very valid question, because I am utterly sold out to being a Christian. I have total respect for other religions, and I have studied other religions and looked at them. I would say that I'm not confident enough to be so cocky as to believe that we're the only ones who've got it right.
Yeah.
If that's okay. So as far as I am concerned, I absolutely am sold out to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is, for me, God's representative, and his life and ministry and the things Jesus taught, those are the things that guide me, that inspire me. But I see very much, in fact, I do talk about this in the book, that I see that my belief system, originally I thought my belief system was my spirituality. And I then come to realize it isn't, especially because some of your beliefs when you start out are not the same ones as you go a bit further down the road, are they?
Right.
You kind of, and so I then discovered that my spirituality isn't within the context of what I believe. I also got involved a lot for a while with, I suppose, probably 4 or 5 years into my faith, I got really into the emotional stuff, the Pentecostal, even charismatic stuff of speaking in tongues, of what do I feel, is this what God is saying to me, and I came to a conclusion that I was looking in the wrong place for my spirituality. I was looking at words in books, theological, intellectual stuff. And I was also looking in whether I felt God loved me or not. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to imagine that God's love for us is based on our behavior. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a no-brainer, really, because I'm not saying that we should behave badly, but I've got 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren, and I've got lots of reasons not to love them, but I'm never not going to love them. Do you know what I mean? So I think relationship might be an issue.
Yeah. I want to just kind of pause there for a second, because it's the interpretation I believe a lot of Christians have, and you say, how could not God love me? Well, many Christians believe that God will eternally damn people. So that's why sometimes people come to that conclusion about Christianity, like, that can be problematic.
It's very problematic. It really is very problematic. And of course, that's what it does come down to interpretation, because I belong to I suppose a growing number of Christians who accepts that the interpretation that we've always had handed down to us is quite binary, and
Yes.
and I think for instance, we hook into the Old Testament, and I'm gonna sound like a complete heretic here. So we hook into the Old Testament in particular, and we draw a lot of what I think the Old Testament was recording as happened. And this is where I become perhaps a bit heretical, because Abraham said God told him to kill his son. He did tell us this after he didn't kill his son, and other things got in the way.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I know that's not a very, people don't like that view of the scripture, but I think a lot of it is how we read the scripture. And why do we take the Bible, for instance, and read it the way that we read no other literature on the planet? Nobody picks up literature of any sort and takes it so literal without engaging that, the hermeneutics around it.
And it wasn't meant to be taken literally.
Absolutely.
The Jews didn't take it literally.
I don't think so. And so for me, I think I look at the weight of the message of the Bible.
Okay.
And I look at the weight of the message of Jesus. And Jesus was very much about love and acceptance and forgiveness. And when we then get into heaven and hell, and will God eternally damn somebody, they're very difficult conversations to have, because what we're asking is, there's a loving God who's so loved us that he would give everything he possibly had up, which was his son, in order to because we don't say the right words, we don't go to the right buildings, we happen to be born in the wrong country. So I've spent a lot of time around Christians that would say, for instance, that you could be born in the middle of the desert, God would send somebody to tell you about Jesus. And I'm thinking, why does he need to send anybody? Jesus has already done it. Interestingly, one of the other books that I'm working on is, if Jesus has completed it, what is there left to do? Why do we need to do anything other than enjoy?
Right. Well, I was raised in Pentecostalism, apostolic church, evangelical, because it's become evangelical now. And a lot of Christians actually evolve out of Christianity because people believe these things. And I remember when I was going through my crisis, because I'm like, after I had my children, even my first daughter, and I was like, if God loves me nearly as much as I love her, and he supposedly loves me infinitely more, there can be no hell, because I would never condemn any of my children to eternal torment. I might be angry with them, but I would never do that. So I discovered a different way to read the Bible, like you're talking about, and I discovered this group. It's called Christian Universalism. And then when I did my studying, I realized for the first 500 years of the church, that was the majority of the church. They believed just what you said. Jesus did it. Jesus completed everything. There's nothing left to be done. Everybody is redeemed. But that became a minority message in the church. So it's interesting how I think hopefully we're coming back around.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that the assumption that people who are not Christians aren't accepted by God is a very tenuous one. Because very often, if you say God doesn't accept somebody because they're not a Christian, however, what if their life measures up to all those values that we're all holding as Christians?
Right.
It's very, very difficult. And actually, to be fair, I'm sure you're the same. I've met some rotten people, and most of them were in the church. And I've met some really, really godly, gracious, kind-hearted people, and they never go anywhere near a church. So kind of. which in a sense is why in my book Pause, I've specifically aimed it not as a religious book,
Mm-hmm.
but as a book for people that want to ask the question: is there more than just what I think and more than what I feel
Right.
to me? And there is. And in fact, one of the premises of the book is that, and again, I believe this, I think it's in the scripture, that everybody, it says in the scripture, and I'm trying to quote a verse and I can't remember where it is, I think it's Job, but the spirit of man, I think it's in the Psalms actually, goes back to God.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happens, the body goes into the earth and the spirit goes back to God.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get entangled in. So the spirit's gone back to God because it was always his. The body's gone to the earth because it's always been matter. What's the bit that got saved that goes into this special bedroom, with Jesus?
Right.
It's kind of a bit odd. So yeah, I'm a great believer, and I'm quite clear in the book about this, that I think it's impossible to be human and not have a spirit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I believe that spirit is actually it's a part of God. It's a gift from God. All human beings will be given a gift, and it's the Spirit of God.
And
And I think when I know you're going to challenge that, but just to clarify what I mean by that is, I think what we fail is that our conversation becomes too much about whether the theology adds up, as opposed to. I remember very early on as a preacher listening to somebody in a Reformed church, and I then spoke in that church
mm-hmm.
a few months after this chat, and an old lady came up to me and she said, "You've just preached exactly the same message as this other chap." She said, "Except he spent all his time telling us about who's going to hell, and you spent all your time inviting us all to go to heaven."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the message. There is no other message. God loves us. He's got a big heart.
Yeah.
There's room for everybody. And in a sense, universalism is saying it's hard to imagine why, if there's enough seats on the bus, why would God drive past and leave you on the side of the road?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Brian.
No,
Yeah.
I did want to ask you. We have a little bit of a delay. I did want to ask you a question, because I think I heard you say, I don't know if I'm going to see Lee again, and I don't know if I'm going to see, maybe this person again. I'm curious about this because doesn't Christianity teach that we are going to be reunited with our loved ones?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Well, it does, but in what way? What does that actually mean? Because it says we're going to be reunited, unless, of course, we've had 6 husbands prior. Which husband are we going back to be with?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, "Well, you're not given in marriage in the afterlife."
Mm-hmm.
So, I think what I mean is, by that, I don't know if I will see them. It's not that they won't be there. It's that I don't know if we will require that acknowledgement, that conscious emotional awareness that we've seen, that we are seeing that person. And I say that because I think I've come to a position, I'm probably a universalist, but I've come to that position where I have absolutely no doubt Lee will be there, wherever there is. And I don't need to have that confirmed now or in the future. So if what I'm saying is, if the reality of when I cease to breathe air is that my spirit will know or not know whoever I knew or didn't know here, that those things I think they're earthbound. True, I would. And I'm going to see all my friends.
Yeah.
I don't need to. I think the fact that God loves them, they're in His hands. think we've got a bit of an unstable internet going on, aren't we?
Yeah, a little bit. You just you kind of froze up there. So, when you say the spirit goes back to God, let's talk about you. I think you said body, mind, and spirit is who we are.
Yeah.
Are these three separate things? I mean, obviously the body is a separate thing, but spirit, mind separate, or
Again, these are all my own thoughts, and they're very
sure.
philosophical. But I can't see any reason for our existence other than that our spirit is gaining personality.
Okay.
So back to your other question, which is quite apposite, really, is that so I think that at the beginning of my journey, as a baby when I was born, but the gift of God was that He gave me a spirit, which is Rob's spirit, and however long I exist in this format, that spirit, he's gaining some kind of personality, some kind of, personality. And so, yes, when that spirit returns to God, I don't believe there's a separation between here's the spirit, he puts it back in his spirit box, and then takes this Rob guy and says, well, you were a bit of a terror. I'm afraid you're going with the goats. I just don't get that.
Right.
So the answer to your question is, I don't believe the body, mind, and spirit are actually separate things, except I believe we don't get to truly understand our spirituality unless we begin to see them as operating in different realms, different ways.
Right.
In my book, I use an illustration really to do with this, and that's that the young lady comes home from school, she's not right, and her mum says to her, has something happened at school? No. Have you fell out with somebody? No. Have you got a test tomorrow you're worried about? No. Are you not feeling very well? Is your stomach not? No. What's happening is mum is going through all the categories that she knows to identify what's going on with this daughter. But actually, what if there's something going on of which there is no category known? And so to explain that, what I say is, if you think of the spirit, everything we apply to it is a category to do with our intellect or our feelings. And I've just gone at pains to say, actually, your spirit doesn't operate with intellect and feelings. So every time we try and interrogate our spirit mentally, what we're doing, we're trying to make sense of it with a category that doesn't exist in it. And that's another reason why I say to people, only you will ever know if you have encountered the spirit within you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's really interesting as we try to put language to these things. I'm reading a book right now, and this guy uses ego, unconscious, and inner conscious to kind of talk about these things. And he says the ego, which we would maybe consider our mind, doesn't communicate directly with the inner conscience. And I think this is kind of these concepts are really interesting because I don't think they're actually separate entities, but they're ways that we have to use to define it, because there's something about being in the body and having the ego and having the mind where the spirit is, as you said, operates in a different realm. It operates in what we consider to be a non-physical realm. So we have to use this language to try, like models. It's like when you mentioned atoms earlier. Well, scientists used to tell atoms where these little balls in the nucleus, so the protons and the neutrons, and the electrons are little things circling around it. And that was a great model, but that's not the way atoms really are.
Exactly. Yes, and we learn as we go along, don't we?
Right.
So the other thing that's been interesting, thinking back to the religious side of things, is I tend to recognise that we're often manipulated through the emotional, mental, the ego. But we can't really manipulate each other's spirit because we don't interact that way.
Right.
So I'm very conscious of that. There's something, which is why I kind of go back to, that book of Hebrews, which I don't think I don't think we fully grasp. But Hebrews talks a lot about that spirituality that's deep and unfathomable, and it's not to do with the intellect. It's not to do with the theology. It's not to do with how we can work things out with our senses.
Mm-hmm.
It's something beyond that, and that to me is what just keeps circling and circling around. I often say to people, if you seek a moment of pause, which we all do, to be fair, we're all looking for a moment within the spirit within us and away from the madness of the world. But if you seek a moment of pause, the reward is there with it. You don't bring something back with you. I always say, if I've had a moment of pause, it does affect my day. It makes it slightly better, I'm sure. But I don't go and pause in order to bring something back with me to affect my mental world or my physical world. The fact that it does is a completely separate thing.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Because in fact, one of the other things I'm very, very conscious of, and I say very often, is my body and my mind can improve and deteriorate. And in fact, I know I'm only 61, but now I've got metal plates in my feet and screws sticking out. I know my body is deteriorating, but and one day my mind and my body will deteriorate and cease to function. My spirit cannot deteriorate. It is complete in every way.
Right.
Which is why I think the Bible says it goes back to God. It's probably the only bit that's left of us that goes back to God.
Mm-hmm.
But I hold on to the bit that goes back to God. I am also my personality. It's now called Rob.
Right. Right.
Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? But yeah. Of course, if we were Hindus, or even probably Hindus, but or of other religions, we might just say that your body goes into the ground and becomes energy; it never ceases to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Our thoughts, particularly now we're articulating them, are retained within the human family.
Yes.
So in a way, nothing ever ceases to exist.
Right.
But I think you and I are really interested, well, not just you and I, but folk listening too. We're really interested in this extra element of our existence that's not going to deteriorate, not going to cease to exist, not going to disappear from sight. It's going to continue for all eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what the Christian message is. And everything else that we've hung around the sides of it, of mechanisms to keep the church going.
Absolutely.
To the So, and I say that with, I love the church. I love Christianity. I'm a Christian, and I've got brothers and sisters, in the family of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not fooled by the reality that I don't need to put my money into a little box, or I don't need to tick a box and turn up every Sunday. I don't need to stand on a corner with a placard, tell everybody what I think they should do. One of the key things that I think I came to myself was that if we truly believe that God is an all-powerful, unsurpassable being, whose will can't be usurped, then can we not trust God with a few people to work things out?
That actually reminds me, I always plug this book whenever I can. There's a great book by a guy named Thomas Talbot called The Inescapable Love of God, where he makes a philosophical argument for universalism. It's biblical, but it's also philosophical. And he makes kind of the same point you're making, because there's always been this argument, well, if God's all powerful, then he should be able to save everybody. If God's all loving, then he would want to save everybody. But the church tells us that he's both of these things, but he doesn't save everybody. And that does not line up. And so the message of universalism is God is all powerful and God is all loving. Therefore, he will save everyone. And that's just a real short synopsis of it.
It is, and that's because they often, and I think we all to some extent, get tied up in justice. That God is also all, he's perfect justice. So his justice has to be satisfied. There's all this language. That's why you get sacrifice and all this stuff. But my view is Christ came. He solved the problem. I often use this description that Jesus didn't just make a way to heaven. He ripped the door off.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not standing there letting somebody in and letting somebody out.
Yeah.
There is no door. There is no restriction. And of course, there are lots of verses that you can always hang on a verse here or there, but ultimately his sacrifice was for all time.
Yeah. Well, he says, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And people don't realize that gates are designed to keep things out. They would build gates around the city to keep things out. So he's like, I'm smashing down the gates of hell, is what that verse actually means.
Yes.
So anyway, I could go on about this, but Rob, I really enjoyed having you here today. So remind people the name of the book and where they can reach you.
Yeah, sure. So the book's dead simple. Pause, a spiritual power. And my name's Rob Wykes. You can get it on Amazon, or if you just Google my name, Rob Wykes, pause, it'll all come up. And you can get it in most Barnes and Noble. You can get it in most bookshops. And my email address is pause, Pause, at robwykes.com.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. It's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you. It's been great to get to know you too, Brian. Yeah, God bless you.
Enjoy your afternoon.
And you.
Hey there, if you like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you liked. If you didn't like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you didn't like. Go to grieftogrowth.com/community and look for Talk About the Podcast. I'll see you there.